Beneath the quiet weight of centuries, beneath the unyielding embrace of earth and dust, the city lies in patient slumber. Its streets, once alive with the rhythm of countless footsteps, now sleep under a mantle of soil, their corners pressed into shadow by the slow hand of time. The wind moves over the cracked stones with a mournful softness, carrying with it a memory too delicate to endure the scrutiny of the living. Each empty alley is a hollow note in a melody long forgotten, a tune that once pulsed with laughter, cries, and the mundane insistence of daily life. Yet now, the city exists in a peculiar state between absence and presence, buried perhaps, but not entirely erased. Imagine walking down one of its forgotten avenues. The houses have surrendered their roofs, and walls lean as though weary of holding up the sky. Windows gape like hollow eyes, blind to the centuries that have passed, yet still somehow aware of the lives that once pressed close behind them. The stones beneath your feet are rough, uneven, worn by generations who carried their joys, their fears, their ambitions across the same paths. These streets were not merely stone and mortar. They were vessels of memory, channels through which humanity expressed its desire to endure, to build, to leave behind something that might whisper across time. And now, all that remains is silence. A silence that is not merely the absence of sound, but the presence of what has been forgotten, the weight of all that was left unremembered. In its prime, the city was a convergence of human hope and ambition. Merchants brought spices and metals from distant lands. Scholars debated philosophy and law in open courtyards. Priests tended to gods both familiar and strange, their rituals binding the invisible to the tangible. Every corner was alive with intention. Every threshold marked the intersection of human aspiration and divine decree. And yet, for all its life, the city was not immune to the inexorable forces that shape history. Floods could wash away entire neighborhoods in the span of a single night. Fires, sparked by carelessness or conquest, could turn laughter into ash. And over time, even in the absence of catastrophe, the slow erosion of memory claimed what humans had built, until the living moved on and the city became a ghost. It is in this space between life and oblivion that the true weight of its story resides. Archaeologists who stumble upon its buried remnants speak not only of stone and bone, but of humanity's stubborn insistence upon permanence in the face of impermanence. When we uncover fragments of wall or street, we are confronted not only by what was, but by the knowledge of what can vanish. We see in these ruins a reflection of ourselves, the desire to matter, the fear of being forgotten, the silent hope that even if the world changes, a trace of our existence might persist. These streets, now mute and hidden beneath layers of soil, once bore witness to choices and consequences that shaped generations. They were the arteries of a civilization's heartbeat, carrying life and memory alike. Walking among the ruins, even now, one senses a peculiar kind of audience. The city watches though it cannot see. Its silence is attentive, bearing witness to the living who seek to understand what it once meant to thrive here. One can almost hear it breathe through the cracks in its walls, the gaps in its streets, the spaces between one worn stone and the next. Its memory is not orderly. It is fragmented, a mosaic of moments half remembered, glimpsed in shards of pottery, traces of pigment on plaster, the faint impressions of footsteps pressed into hardened earth. Every fragment speaks, in its quiet way, of ordinary lives caught in extraordinary circumstances. And though no voice can be heard, the city's story is inscribed in the very rhythm of its decay. There is a particular kind of melancholy that comes with such discovery. It is not the dramatics of apocalypse, nor the spectacle of ruin. It is the subtle ache of absence. The streets were once places of negotiation and encounter, of lovers and thieves, of celebration and despair. They held the ordinary dramas of human life, repeated daily, yet each instance was a singular note in a symphony of civilization. To walk where they walked is to confront the impossibility of complete understanding, yet the intimacy of shared experience persists across centuries. In this way, the city becomes more than history. It becomes a meditation on continuity, on the tenuous threads that bind past and present. It is also a testament to the fragility of memory. For every fragment we uncover, countless more have already slipped entirely beyond reach. Buildings collapse, records decay, voices are swallowed by time. The absence of written history does not mean the absence of story. Rather, it challenges us to read the invisible traces left behind, to listen to the soft hum of what survives in silence. Archaeologists and historians sift through dust and detritus, reconstructing not merely structures but the rhythms of life that once animated them. They uncover patterns in street layouts, the residues of daily chores, the footprints of animals mingled with human passage. And in doing so, they remind us that a city is not simply a collection of buildings. It is the aggregate of lives, memories, and decisions, fragile yet defiant against oblivion. Even as the centuries press on, the city resists being forgotten entirely. In oral traditions, in scattered manuscripts, in faint traces on maps, its presence endures. It waits patiently for those who are willing to uncover it, to listen to the whispers hidden beneath layers of soil, to trace the outlines of life that once flourished there. And perhaps this is the most profound lesson it offers. That memory itself is a form of survival, that a city need not stand unbroken to remain alive. Its essence persists in the human desire to remember, to connect with what was, and to honor the fragile beauty of lives lived long ago. As the sun sets and casts long shadows over its buried avenues, one can almost imagine the streets stirring in remembrance. The echoes of laughter, the clatter of carts, the soft murmur of conversation, all resonate faintly beneath the soil, as though the city itself exhales in recognition of being acknowledged once more. It waits in the quiet, patient and eternal, a monument not of stone alone but of memory, of humanity's ceaseless attempt to leave a mark upon the world. In its silence, it speaks louder than any living voice, reminding us that what is buried is not necessarily lost, and that some cities refuse to die because they survive in the hearts and minds of those who remember. And so we begin our journey through this lost civilization, walking carefully along streets that no longer bear the weight of living feet, yet still carry the weight of history. Here, in the silence of forgotten streets, we encounter not only a city but the enduring human spirit, a testament to creation, survival, and the quiet, haunting persistence of memory. It is here, in this stillness, that we learn the first truth of a city that refused to die. That even when everything else fades, memory endures, waiting for those willing to listen. Amid the quiet desolation of the lost city, the remnants of fire and stone speak with a language older than memory. Walls blackened by ancient conflagrations lean against one another as though holding themselves upright through sheer will, their scars a record of both violence and survival. Where once laughter spilled into courtyards and voices rose in argument, only shadows linger now, tracing the outlines of what once was. Every fragment of burned timber, every fractured brick, becomes a testament, a silent chronicle of a civilization that lived boldly, and sometimes recklessly, in the face of impermanence. Fire was both destroyer and illuminator. In its destructive form, it reduced dwellings to ash and history to rubble. Yet in the glow of hearths and ceremonial pyres, it bound communities together, marking celebrations, rites of passage, and sacred moments. The city's people understood this duality, for flame was not merely a tool, but a symbol. It mirrored the fragility of life itself, luminous and warming, yet fleeting, capable of both creation and erasure. As archaeologists brush soot-stained stones and sift through charred remnants, they find evidence not only of disaster but of resilience, a story that refuses to be simplified into catastrophe. The stone itself is patient, resilient, recording what wood and flesh could not endure. Streets, once laid with precision, now fracture under the slow pressure of centuries, yet their patterns reveal careful planning, the invisible hand of builders who sought order amid the chaos of existence. Public squares, though cracked and overgrown, retain a rhythm of human life. The deliberate spacing of columns, the alignment of gateways, the silent markers of commerce and congregation. In these enduring forms, the city speaks across time, asserting that even when fire consumes, memory can endure in the permanence of stone. Yet these echoes are not merely architectural. They carry the weight of human emotion, of fear, hope, and desire. Each wall that resisted collapse, each fragment of pottery rescued from ruin, bears witness to choices made under pressure, to lives lived fully despite the shadow of uncertainty. In this way, the city becomes more than a ruin. It becomes a repository of human meaning, an archive of both fragility and audacity. Here, the intersection of natural forces and human ambition forms a subtle rhythm, a pulse that continues to resonate even in silence. As night descends, the remnants of the city seem to exhale, the darkness curling around fractured stone as if acknowledging the passage of centuries. The memory of fire, of streets alive with heat and movement, remains imprinted in the stones, whispering of moments that can never be fully reconstructed, yet refusing to vanish entirely. In these echoes of stone and flame, we glimpse a civilization at once mortal and enduring, fleeting in its life, yet eternal in the traces it left behind. And so, even in ruin, the city speaks, not with the clamor of life, but with the quiet insistence of memory preserved against the eroding hand of time. In the heart of the city, where streets once converged into plazas of authority, the echoes of rulers linger like faint footprints pressed into dust. The kings and magistrates who once commanded life and law here have long since faded, leaving behind only the traces of their ambition. Stone thrones collapsed under centuries of weight, and ceremonial platforms, now draped in lichen and shadow, hint at a time when power was tangible, almost sacred. Their presence was felt in every street, in the cadence of markets, in the silent awe of temples. And yet, with the passage of generations, these figures became more shadow than substance, their authority absorbed by the slow, unyielding flow of time. The ruler's influence was not merely political. It was spiritual, psychological, and deeply human. Kings were seen as intermediaries with the divine, conduits of cosmic will, their decisions resonating beyond mere governance. Festivals, sacrifices, and decrees were not acts of vanity, but expressions of a society trying to reconcile human fragility with the apparent permanence of power. The stones of palaces and administrative halls were etched with inscriptions meant to immortalize deeds and affirm dominion, yet even these carefully crafted symbols have eroded, leaving only fragments that tease at the grandeur that once defined them. Power in this city was intimately tied to mortality. Each ruler understood that their reign was temporary, yet sought to stretch its shadow across generations. Ceremonial regalia, gilded masks, and intricate carvings were all attempts to anchor human presence against the inevitability of decay. And in these objects, we glimpse the universal human longing to be remembered, to shape a legacy beyond flesh and bone. Yet history moves as if indifferent to such ambitions. The kings, once exalted, now exist in the same muted register as the streets and walls, present yet intangible, remembered only in fragment and rumor. There is a subtle melancholy in witnessing such faded authority. The city itself absorbs the shadows of its rulers, preserving a memory that is both reverent and tragic. We can imagine the pageantry of coronations, the hushed fear of dissent, the strategic brilliance and human error intertwined in every decision. And then, as centuries pass, these lives collapse into obscurity, leaving only traces in inscriptions, ruin, and the quiet testimony of the streets themselves. Power is revealed not as eternal, but as a fragile, ephemeral current, carried by human ambition yet destined to disperse like smoke. Even in absence, these shadows hold lessons. They remind us that civilization is not shaped solely by monuments or decrees, but by the human choices that ripple outward into time. The kings may be gone, their faces eroded from memory, yet their presence endures in the city's rhythm, the avenues that once echoed with marching feet, the plazas that bore witness to celebration and grief alike. Here, in this interplay of stone, shadow, and silence, we sense a truth both unsettling and sublime, that the grandeur of rulers may fade, but the imprint of their lives, and the lives of those they governed, persists in the quiet pulse of a city that refuses to forget. Flowing quietly at the city's edges, the river was once more than a channel of water. It was the pulse of life, the silent witness to centuries of human endeavor. Its currents carried fish, grain, and rumor alike, threading together neighborhoods, markets, and temples with a rhythm both practical and poetic. Merchants watched its surface for signs of trade, children paddled along its shallow banks, and priests performed rituals on its banks, offering homage to forces that were at once capricious and eternal. The river did not speak in words, yet it preserved memory with a persistence that stone and brick could scarcely rival. Rivers have a way of witnessing that which humans cannot control. Floods erased entire districts in a single season. Droughts whispered of scarcity and fear. Yet even in destruction, the water retained fragments of the city's life. Seeds of commerce, splinters of wood, the faint stains of dye and pigment from workshops that lined its banks. In this, the river became a custodian of continuity, holding traces of human existence long after roofs caved and walls crumbled. Its slow, unyielding flow mirrors the passage of time itself, relentless yet patient, carrying the accumulated memory of all who lived beside it. But the river was also a mirror, reflecting the deeper currents of human desire and fear. Those who depended on it learned to read its moods, to interpret the subtle swell of its tides as portents. A flood might inspire devotion, a dry season provoke innovation. In this way, water became intertwined with morality, ritual, and psychology. Not merely a resource, but a medium through which people understood their place in a world that often seemed indifferent. The river was at once an ally and a teacher, its memory spanning both triumph and tragedy. Archaeologists who trace the river's ancient course discover the faint outline of docks, the eroded remains of embankments, and traces of pottery discarded or lost to its currents. Each artifact carries both practical purpose and human intention, telling stories of labor, commerce, and the desire to impose order upon nature. The river preserves a silent testimony that civilization is inseparable from its environment, that the forces of nature and human ambition are forever entwined, shaping and reshaping one another across time. As the sun dips and casts gold across the flowing water, it is possible to imagine the river remembering its city in full life. Children laughing at its edge, merchants bargaining over floating goods, the scent of baked bread mingling with the wet earth. It does not speak of loss alone, but of continuity, of endurance. Even when the city above it fell silent, the river remembered. And perhaps this is the truest form of immortality, not in stone or inscription, but in the quiet, patient act of witnessing. The river flows onward, carrying memory in its current, ensuring that even what is buried cannot vanish entirely. In its reflection, the city lives, imperceptible yet eternal, a civilization preserved in the rhythm of water and time. Time is the quietest of devourers, patient and relentless, consuming wood, stone, and memory with the same unerring diligence. In the lost city, its passage is visible in every crack, every leaning wall, every fragment of pottery buried beneath centuries of dust. Where once laughter and labor filled the streets, now only erosion marks the rhythm of life. The city did not fall in a single day, nor vanish in a cataclysmic fire. It was consumed slowly, gradually, by the accumulation of ordinary days, by the passing of seasons, by the subtle weight of neglect. And yet, paradoxically, in this slow consumption, the city preserves the essence of what it once was. Archaeologists uncover the hunger of time in fragments. A broken column here, a faded fresco there, the soft impressions of footsteps pressed into hardened clay. Each artifact bears witness to survival in the face of impermanence. Time does not discriminate. It spares neither palace nor hovel, priest nor merchant, ruler nor beggar. Yet in its impartiality, it reveals the fragility of human endeavor and the quiet heroism of persistence. To build, to create, to leave behind a mark is an act of defiance against this inexorable force, a whisper against silence, a small rebellion that time itself cannot fully erase. The city's decay also offers lessons in human perception. Walls crumble, but they reveal the methods of construction. Roofs collapse, but they expose the ingenuity of design. The very acts of erosion illuminate lives once lived in complexity and intent. Through this slow attrition, we understand the human impulse to endure, to shape the world, to confront mortality with action. Time, though destructive, becomes a lens through which the subtle poetry of ordinary existence is revealed. Each loss is also a story, each fracture a chapter in the narrative of life. There is a certain melancholy in witnessing this process. Time does not wait for emotion, nor does it honor intention. It advances quietly, reshaping memory and landscape alike. Yet the city resists complete annihilation, if only in fragments. Its streets, even fractured and overgrown, retain the imprint of human life. Its walls whisper of rituals, debates, festivals, and sorrow. And so, even as time gnaws at its edges, the city persists in absence, a paradoxical monument to both the inevitability of decay and the resilience of memory. As shadows lengthen across its worn stones, one can almost feel the pulse of the past beating faintly beneath the soil. Time may hunger, but it does not consume completely. In the interplay of erosion and endurance, destruction and revelation, the city teaches that mortality is not only the end of life but the transformation of memory. And in this transformation, it survives, not as it once was, but as it always will be. A quiet testament to the passage of centuries, a civilization endlessly devoured, yet eternally remembered. Beneath the city's fractured streets and crumbling walls lie fragments of thought pressed into clay, small slabs that have survived centuries as if determined to bear witness. These tablets, etched with careful hands, carry the voices of a civilization long silenced. The markings are simple yet profound, records of trade, decrees, personal correspondence, and prayers. In their grooves and scratches, one glimpses the rhythm of daily life, the worries and aspirations of ordinary people whose names have vanished but whose presence endures through this fragile medium. Clay is more than a tool. It is a vessel of memory. Wet and malleable, it captures intention, thought, and emotion, holding them against the ravages of time. Once baked, it resists wind, fire, and decay, preserving the human mind in miniature. These slabs are testimony not only to literacy or administration but to the human desire to make oneself known, to communicate across the chasm of mortality. Each stroke of the stylus carries with it the breath of a life, the echo of a voice that might otherwise have been lost to silence. The inscriptions also reveal a society bound by structure and ritual. Legal codes, tax records, and temple inventories speak of a civilization striving for order in a world governed by uncertainty. Yet alongside these pragmatic writings lie notes of devotion, poetry, and reflection, evidence that even in times of toil, humanity sought meaning beyond survival. One can almost hear the scribes at work, their hands stained with clay, their minds focused on preserving truth and memory. They were the quiet custodians of civilization, recording not only events but the intangible pulse of a culture. Its hopes, its fears, its relentless striving for permanence. Clay tablets speak as much of psychology as of history. They reveal the anxieties of rulers and commoners alike, the desire to secure justice, the fear of transgression, the longing for legacy. In their careful etchings, we see the human attempt to order chaos, to make sense of mortality through words and symbols. And yet, even in the most meticulous record, there is room for ambiguity. Spaces left blank, corrections, unfinished lines. These gaps remind us that memory is always partial, that history is a dialogue between what survives and what is lost. As archaeologists uncover these buried voices, a faint intimacy emerges. The city, silent above ground, becomes vocal through its clay. The marketplace hums with imagined conversation. Temples echo with ritual, private homes whisper of love, argument, and daily routine. The past reaches forward through time, insisting upon recognition, offering a connection to lives that, though long ended, were vivid and urgent in their moment. In the press of stylus on clay, humanity has left a record that resists oblivion, a subtle insistence that even buried civilizations may still be heard. And so, the voices buried in clay remind us that memory is never entirely lost. Through small, deliberate gestures, human thought transcends mortality, leaving traces that endure far beyond the fleeting span of life. Even in ruin, the city speaks, softly but insistently, through the grooves of clay that once captured the heartbeat of a civilization. In listening, we become witnesses, bridging centuries with the simplest yet most profound of connections. The echo of thought preserved against time itself. Among the ruins, the faint outlines of temples emerge like shadows pressed against time itself. Pillars, cracked and blackened, still carry the weight of devotion, though no worshipper remains to honor them. The gods who once commanded obedience and reverence now exist only in fragments. Chipped statues, faded murals, and the lingering scent of incense absorbed into stone. Dust gathers in the corners where once candles flickered, as if the very air remembers the prayers and sacrifices offered centuries ago. In this quiet, the divine persists, not in power but in memory, an enduring presence born of human longing. The city's deities were not distant abstractions. They were intimate and immediate, shaping the rhythm of daily life. Merchants sought their favor for successful trade. Farmers invoked their protection for fertile fields. Rulers aligned their authority with divine will. Rituals governed time and morality alike, connecting the sacred to the mundane. In these practices, we glimpse a civilization wrestling with forces it could not fully understand, attempting to give shape to the unseen through acts of devotion. The gods were at once comforting and terrifying, embodying both human aspiration and human fear. Even in decay, the presence of the divine shapes our understanding of the city. Each eroded statue or altar is a reminder of how memory and faith endure, even when the structures that house them crumble. The gods become metaphors for human persistence, ideals that outlast the fragile vessels built in their honor, reflections of the human need to find order and meaning in a world defined by impermanence. Archaeologists note the careful placement of shrines and altars, the alignment of temples with the rising sun, the intricate designs carved into stone, all of it revealing a people attuned not only to the physical but to the spiritual currents that guided their lives. The dust itself is a kind of witness, settling over symbols of divinity yet preserving them in silence. One can almost imagine the soft murmur of voices, the chants and prayers carried faintly through time, their echoes absorbed into the very walls. In the absence of living worship, the gods live through memory. In the careful reconstruction of ruins, in the interpretation of ritual objects, and in the human imagination that seeks to connect with what has been lost. Here, the sacred is inseparable from history, a reminder that belief is as enduring as stone, and perhaps more resilient than the hands that carved it. As evening descends and the last light of day touches the temple's cracked surfaces, the gods of dust seem to exhale, a subtle acknowledgement that they are not forgotten. Though worshippers have vanished, their presence lingers in the deliberate traces left behind, in the rituals that shaped daily existence, in the memory that refuses to fade. In this way, the city teaches that divinity is not only in the act of veneration, but in remembrance itself. Even in ruin, even in silence, the gods endure, spectral witnesses to a civilization that, though buried, continues to speak through the dust of memory and devotion. Even amidst ruin, one can imagine the city alive with celebration, its markets and courtyards brimming with the pulse of life. The scent of baking bread mingled with the smoke of hearths, the clatter of clay vessels echoing like distant music. Here, amid the ordinary, the extraordinary unfolded. Festivals to honor gods, rites of passage marking birth and death, gatherings that wove community together with ritual and revelry. The feast was more than food. It was a declaration of existence, a resistance to the relentless passage of time, a momentary defiance against impermanence. Evidence of these gatherings survives in fragments. Scorched pottery from communal ovens, the faint outlines of dining halls, and the remnants of amphorae once heavy with wine. These objects, silent though they are, speak of abundance and scarcity alike, of celebrations that continued even when hardship pressed close. Famine and invasion could shadow the city, yet human ingenuity and the need for connection found expression in these shared moments. The feast was never simply nourishment. It was a ritual, a testament to cohesion, identity, and memory. The city's inhabitants understood the significance of ritualized consumption. Festivals followed the cycles of the seasons, aligning human activity with celestial patterns and agricultural needs. These occasions were opportunities to assert order, to negotiate social hierarchies, and to cement the bonds of community. The tables and plazas were stages upon which human drama played out. Laughter and argument, reconciliation and rivalry, joy and lament, all intertwined in an intricate choreography of life. Even in the shadow of uncertainty, the act of gathering for a feast affirmed the city's vitality and the resilience of its people. In the quiet left behind, one senses the ghosts of these moments. The empty plazas and overgrown courtyards retain the rhythm of past gatherings, as though the city itself remembers the cadence of feet, the murmur of conversation, the delicate clink of cups. Archaeologists and historians attempt to reconstruct these scenes, piecing together patterns of trade, storage, and consumption, yet the essence of the feast is more than mere material evidence. It is a reflection of human desire to create joy, to assert presence, and to carve meaning from the fleeting passage of time. As the sun falls and shadows lengthen across the remnants of kitchens and halls, the feast persists in memory. Though no voice calls and no laughter rises, the city offers a subtle testimony. That life, even ordinary life, carries its own sacredness. Celebration is not merely a luxury. It is an act of defiance against oblivion, a declaration that human experience, once lived, endures. In imagining the city alive with feasts, we confront the persistence of culture, the endurance of community, and the eternal human impulse to leave behind traces of joy. The tables may be empty now, but the feast never truly ended. It lives on in memory, waiting for those willing to listen to the echoes of what once was. Even in its most peaceful days, the city bore the subtle tension of vulnerability. Its walls, once towering and imposing, were both shields and witnesses, standing sentinel against forces that lurked beyond the horizon. The river that nourished its fields could also be a highway for invaders, and the roads that carried merchants' goods could just as easily carry soldiers' boots. Every stone, every threshold, was part of a fragile equilibrium between life and violence, prosperity and ruin. The city existed in a constant dialogue with threat, and in that dialogue it learned resilience, but also the inevitability of change. When conquest arrived, it was rarely sudden in memory, though the consequences were catastrophic. Invading forces moved with purpose, aware that the spoils of victory extended beyond material wealth. They sought dominance over people, over beliefs, over the very rhythm of daily existence. And yet, history reveals that the city's fall was never the product of a single moment of aggression, but of cumulative pressures: political instability, scarcity, climate, and the unrelenting friction of ambition. The whispers of conquest are as much the story of human frailty as of martial prowess. The city's vulnerability lay not only in walls but in the intertwined lives that depended upon its structures. Archaeologists uncover these echoes of invasion in subtle forms. Arrowheads lodged in defensive walls, scorch marks along wooden scaffolding, fragments of weapons discarded or broken. Each artifact is a frozen gesture of struggle. The streets, once routes of commerce and celebration, reveal patterns of hurried retreat, barricades erected in desperation, homes abandoned in fear. Yet in these signs of conflict, there is also evidence of adaptation and survival. Citizens devised clever means of protection. Hidden chambers, fortified granaries, escape routes now lost to time. Even in the face of relentless pressure, the city's inhabitants demonstrated ingenuity and courage, their small acts of resistance echoing faintly through the centuries. Conquest is never merely physical. It reshapes memory, belief, and identity. Temples were desecrated, records erased, and sacred rituals interrupted. The invaders sought not only to claim territory but to assert authority over meaning itself, to rewrite the narrative of existence in their own image. Yet memory is more persistent than force. Though temples burned and inscriptions were defaced, the stories of the city's people survived in oral tradition, in clandestine rituals, and in the enduring layout of streets and plazas. The physical destruction could not entirely erase the intangible threads of culture, and these threads became vessels of quiet defiance, a whisper that the city, though scarred, had not surrendered entirely. One can imagine the psychological weight of such an invasion. Fear would have permeated every home, every marketplace, every temple. Mothers shielded children, elders offered counsel, and citizens weighed the impossible choices between resistance, submission, or flight. These moments of terror and courage were ordinary, yet extraordinary in their accumulation, shaping the collective memory of the city for generations. Conquest leaves no single narrative. It leaves countless stories, layered and intertwined, each carrying fragments of despair and resilience. In studying these traces, we glimpse not just the power of armies, but the quiet endurance of human spirit under duress. The whispers of conquest also speak of the broader forces that shape civilization. The city's fall was not simply the story of invaders and defenders. It was part of a chain of events spanning empires, climate shifts, economic pressures, and human ambition. The scars of invasion were absorbed and transformed, influencing architecture, law, and ritual for generations to come. The lessons etched in stone and memory reveal a paradox. Destruction is both an ending and a beginning, erasure and preservation intertwined. Through the lens of conquest, the city becomes a teacher, offering insight into how human societies respond to pressure, adapt to trauma, and strive to endure. Even now, centuries later, the city speaks through these traces. Archaeologists walking along once battered walls sense the rhythm of those who fled, fought, or hid. Burned granaries and toppled statues become markers not only of violence but of survival. The river, which carried goods and gossip in times of peace, would have borne bodies, messages, and memories in times of strife. Nature itself participates in this narrative, eroding what remains yet preserving patterns invisible to the casual observer. The whispers of conquest are not confined to the past. They are layered into the city's landscape, a conversation between human intention and the inexorable currents of time. Conquest, in this city, was not merely a moment of destruction but a transformation. It reshaped the identity of inhabitants, altered patterns of daily life, and forced a reckoning with impermanence. Yet it also highlighted resilience, the ability of a civilization to absorb trauma, adapt, and persist in fragments, even beneath the weight of loss. The city's memory survived in alleys, walls, inscriptions, and the stories passed from parent to child, proving that even in the shadow of overwhelming force, human presence leaves an indelible mark. As dusk settles over the ruins, the city exhales its centuries of struggle. The shadows of towers and walls, fractured yet upright, seem to tremble in memory of those who faced fire and steel. The whispers of conquest linger, not as triumphant echoes of invaders, but as a testament to endurance, to the persistence of culture, to the quiet defiance of a civilization that refused to vanish entirely. In these ruins, the past is neither absolute nor complete. It is a mosaic of violence and survival, despair and courage. And in listening closely, one realizes that conquest, though it can devastate, cannot erase entirely the enduring heartbeat of memory. Even in ruin, the city remains alive, not through walls or monuments, but through the faint yet persistent traces of lives lived with intention, hope, and resilience. The whispers of conquest are reminders that history is not simply written in victories and defeats, but in the quiet persistence of human memory, surviving always beneath the weight of time. In the quiet corridors of the lost city, the walls speak. Not in words, nor in sound that can be heard by the living, but in a subtle, persistent language that survives in stone and plaster. Every crack, every etching, every weathered brick is a sentence, a syllable, a story pressed into permanence. These walls have witnessed everything. The laughter of children, the hurried steps of merchants, the whispered prayers of lovers, and the solemn chants of priests. They have absorbed the light of countless suns, the shadows of countless nights, and yet they endure, holding memory in a way that neither ink nor parchment could fully achieve. The city's builders understood that walls were more than mere boundaries. They were vessels of culture, consciousness, and continuity. Through their composition and form, walls conveyed authority, belonging, and reverence. Temples were designed to awe, with carvings that spoke of divine lineage and cosmic order. Palaces displayed power, with carefully aligned columns, intricate bas-reliefs, and thresholds that dictated movement, signaling status and hierarchy. Even the homes of ordinary citizens were inscribed with intention, small motifs and structural nuances reflecting identity, aspiration, and belief. The walls were, in essence, the silent curriculum of civilization, teaching, guiding, and memorializing all at once. Archaeologists who examine these surfaces uncover a form of language that is simultaneously explicit and elusive. A chipped fresco may depict a festival, Yet its placement within a courtyard suggests the social rituals surrounding it. A series of interlocking bricks may indicate defensive strategies, but also the aesthetic sensibilities of the builders. Small marks in plaster, perhaps corrections or unfinished carvings, hint at human error, imperfection, and the tactile reality of creation. Every imperfection is meaningful, a trace of intention and humanity preserved in stone. In this way, walls become storytellers, conveying layers of meaning that endure long after the voices that created them have fallen silent. The language of walls is also a reflection of psychology and social structure. They define space, not only in physical terms but in terms of power and behavior. Citizens moved through them, negotiated with them, sought privacy or displayed submission according to their design. In inscriptions and decorative motifs, one glimpses concerns about morality, piety, and order. Protective symbols mark entrances. Depictions of gods watch over thresholds. The city's inhabitants were constantly engaged in dialogue with these silent teachers, learning how to navigate both the visible and invisible rules of their world. Even in ruin, these lessons remain legible, if only to those willing to listen closely. Yet the walls speak of more than instruction. They bear the weight of memory, loss, and endurance. In war and conquest, walls were both shields and witnesses. Scars from weapons, burn marks, and fractured stone tell of siege and survival. Where invaders failed to erase human presence entirely, walls preserved it, embedding the city's story into architecture itself. In this way, they become metaphors for resilience, standing as enduring monuments to the lives, choices, and struggles of those who came before. Every crack is a record of adversity met, every erosion a testament to survival against the ceaseless passage of time. There is also a haunting intimacy in reading these silent texts. One can imagine the hands that crafted them, the sweat and intention pressed into clay and plaster. A child tracing a carved symbol with curiosity, a priest blessing a newly erected wall, a laborer correcting a misaligned brick. Each act leaves its mark, subtle yet indelible. Even centuries later, these marks resonate with human presence, reminding us that memory is not only preserved in words or stories, but in the physical traces of labor, care, and creativity. As sunlight filters through gaps in collapsed roofs, illuminating the walls' faded patterns, the city's language becomes more legible in the mind's eye. The rhythm of courtyards, the alignment of streets, the sequence of doorways, all coalesce into a silent syntax, a grammar of existence. One begins to understand that these walls were never merely structures. They were companions, witnesses, and chroniclers. They recorded the ordinary and extraordinary alike, the mundane and sacred, the ephemeral and eternal. They preserved the pulse of a civilization, its fears, its aspirations, its intricate patterns of social life. Even in silence, the walls invite reflection. They ask us to read between the cracks, to interpret traces left behind, and to listen to the muted voices of a people who once navigated the complexities of life with courage, devotion, and care. In their eroded surfaces, we encounter the intersection of architecture, psychology, and memory. A civilization communicated not just with language but with form, texture, and space. The walls are repositories of meaning, resisting erasure, teaching us that history is not only written in texts, but inscribed into the very fabric of human creation. As dusk falls and shadows stretch across these silent witnesses, one feels the weight of centuries pressing softly against the skin of memory. The walls speak still, in whispers discernible only to those patient enough to attend. They tell of a city that thrived, faltered, and endured, leaving behind a lexicon not of words, but of presence. To stand among them is to participate in a quiet dialogue with the past, to hear stories that survive not through sound but through the enduring eloquence of stone and plaster. In the forgotten language of walls, the city continues to live, patient, resilient, and eternally articulate, offering to the present a bridge to the lives, hopes, and memories of those who built it. Even as centuries weigh upon it, the lost city endures, not in grandeur nor in walls intact but in memory. Memory is its defiance, the quiet rebellion against oblivion, a testament to human persistence. Where stone crumbles and clay erodes, Memory preserves the pulse of life, the cadence of footsteps, the echo of voices long silenced. The city, buried beneath soil and shadow, exists in a liminal space, suspended between erasure and remembrance, a silent argument that what was once lived cannot be wholly undone. Resistance begins in small gestures. The act of writing a name, carving a symbol, or placing an offering in a shrine was more than ceremony. It was a conscious assertion of presence. Every human act is a dialogue with time, an effort to leave a trace that defies disappearance. In this city, memory was embedded in every stone, every artifact, every ritual. Ordinary people, merchants, scribes, children, artisans, participated unwittingly in a larger act of survival. Their lives, choices, and recordings became threads in a tapestry designed to endure, to speak across generations. Historical evidence attests to this quiet form of resistance. Clay tablets preserve transactions and prayers, pottery shards carry the fingerprints of hands long gone, and the remnants of public spaces suggest ceremonies meant to reinforce identity and continuity. Even in times of conquest or calamity, when invaders swept through streets and fire-claimed temples, memory persisted in the margins. Hidden messages scratched into walls, sacred objects concealed beneath floors, oral traditions whispered in secret. These acts, seemingly trivial in the moment, became monumental across centuries, asserting that life and culture cannot be entirely extinguished by force or neglect. Memory as resistance is not only a defense against physical destruction but against the erasure of meaning. The city's inhabitants understood that survival was not merely a matter of food or shelter but of narrative. The stories told, the rituals performed, the laws codified, the arts expressed. When written texts were lost, when monumental structures fell, when fire and flood erased evidence, memory filled the void. Oral tradition, communal practice, and everyday gestures became vessels of continuity, ensuring that the city's spirit remained intact even when its physical form did not. There is also a psychological dimension to this endurance. The act of remembering transforms trauma into understanding, despair into resilience. Citizens preserved not only facts but the emotions and intentions behind them. Memory carried lessons. The consequences of choices, the outcomes of courage and folly, the rhythm of seasons, the morality of actions. In doing so, it became a living archive, not static or inert, but dynamic, evolving with each retelling, each reinterpretation. The city's inhabitants, in recording their lives in subtle ways, engaged in a collective consciousness that transcended mortality. Even now, scholars uncover this resistance in fragments. Archaeological digs reveal layers of occupation, intentional rebuilding after collapse, and traces of ritual observance amid ruins. The city's story is pieced together like a mosaic, incomplete but rich in pattern and resonance. Memory survives where architecture, politics, and conquest have failed, demonstrating that human presence endures through cognition, culture, and imagination. Every artifact is a whisper of agency, a reminder that people once lived with intention, leaving traces that refuse to vanish. Memory is also a mirror, reflecting human hope and defiance. The city's very survival in recollection challenges the natural hierarchy of decay. Though walls crumble, though dust settles over streets, though rulers and invaders vanish from history, the essence of life, the experiences, rituals, and intentions of ordinary humans, persists. Memory transforms vulnerability into resilience, absence into presence, and destruction into continuity. It is the invisible scaffold upon which civilization endures, the unseen force that shapes how history is remembered and how meaning persists. Standing in the ruins, one can feel the weight of this resistance. The city does not demand attention. It invites it. Each fragment of wall, each buried artifact, each trace of human labor becomes a lesson in persistence. To acknowledge them is to participate in the same act of remembrance that sustained the city's identity through centuries of decay. In this quiet dialogue, the living bear witness, and memory, like a river beneath stone, flows onward, carrying the city's story into the present. In the end, the lost city teaches that resistance is not always visible, not always heroic in the conventional sense. It is subtle, patient, and enduring. It resides in memory, in ritual, in the choices that prioritize continuity over spectacle, in the quiet acts that affirm existence against erasure. Even buried beneath centuries of soil, dust, and silence, the city lives, not in its stone or mortar alone, but in the enduring consciousness of those who remember it. Memory is the city's most potent architecture, its most resilient artifact, and its greatest declaration. That life, once lived, refuses to be wholly forgotten. As the sun dips toward the horizon, it casts long shadows across the ruins, turning fractured walls into silhouettes that seem to breathe with memory. In this final glow, the city reveals itself not as an absence but as a witness, a testament to lives that once pulsed with energy, devotion, and purpose. Civilization, like light, is both fragile and insistent. It can flicker, waver, and be snuffed out in moments of disaster or neglect, yet traces remain. Faint inscriptions, worn pathways, the curve of a collapsed arch, all evidence of human intention striving to endure against time's relentless erosion. The last light illuminates spaces that were once vibrant with ritual and commerce, revealing the choreography of life that no longer exists but lingers in pattern. Marketplaces, though overgrown and silent, hint at the ebb and flow of goods, of voices raised in negotiation and laughter, of relationships forged in routine yet layered with significance. Courtyards and temples, their columns fractured but upright, still suggest ceremonial movement. Priests guiding worshippers, children weaving between adults, celebrants raising offerings in the sun's golden warmth. In these traces, one can feel the rhythm of life as it once was, delicate yet deliberate, ephemeral yet deeply human. Civilization is never solely physical. Its essence resides in the intricate web of relationships, beliefs, and practices that animate a city. The lost city structures, however ruined, encode this web. The alignment of streets with sacred sites, the placement of thresholds to control movement, the subtle cues embedded in decoration that dictate behavior, status, and expectation. Every decision of layout or design reflects an understanding of human psychology, of social order, of the imperatives of memory and ritual. Even in collapse, these principles endure, a blueprint of intention that invites reflection on the forces that shape human communities. The city's final days, like the last glow of sunlight, were likely marked by tension between continuity and decline. Scarcity, disease, invasion, and environmental shifts pressed upon its people, testing resilience and ingenuity. Records suggest that rituals persisted even in hardship. Feasts continued, though diminished. Temples were repaired, though fragmentary. In these acts, one glimpses the profound courage of ordinary citizens. Their insistence on life's rituals, their attention to memory, their desire to preserve meaning in the face of impermanence. Civilization, here, becomes less an edifice and more a living consciousness, surviving not only in walls but in practice, intention, and devotion. Even destruction carries lessons about human persistence. The last light exposes burned beams and toppled masonry, yet the city's imprint survives in subtle ways. The positioning of homes, the echoes of marketplaces, the traces of water systems that reflect ingenuity and adaptation. Nature, patient and impartial, reclaims physical structures, but memory persists in parallel, woven into every artifact, every fragment, every whispered story passed from one generation to the next. Light and shadow together render visible the resilience of human endeavor, a dual testament to impermanence and endurance. Psychologically, the city's decline invites reflection on mortality and legacy. What does it mean to build knowing that decay is inevitable? What motivates communities to invest in ritual, art, and governance when all is fleeting? The last light reminds us that civilization is as much an act of hope as of necessity. Each wall raised, each record etched, each festival performed is a statement against absence, a negotiation with time, a prayer that life and memory will persist beyond the immediate moment. Even in the shadow of decline, the city teaches that presence matters, that intention endures, and that the human spirit persists even when all else fades. As dusk deepens into night, the city seems to inhale the fading warmth, holding it as one might a fragile memory. Silence settles across streets, courtyards, and temples, yet in that silence lies a subtle testimony that the end of life is not the end of meaning. Civilization may flicker like a dying candle, yet its light can persist in echoes, patterns, and memory, reaching across centuries to touch those who come after. The lost city's final light is therefore both literal and metaphorical, a glow that illuminates not only ruins but the enduring traces of human experience, the resilience of culture, and the quiet persistence of memory against the erosive forces of time. In this twilight, the city exists as an interface between absence and presence. Its stories, embedded in walls, clay, and memory, offer lessons about the impermanence of life, the persistence of intention, and the subtle triumph of endurance. Even when rulers vanish, markets fall silent, and temples collapse, civilization leaves traces that resist erasure. The last light may fade, but its warmth endures in consciousness, in reflection, and in the act of remembrance. To witness these ruins is to participate in a conversation that began centuries ago, to see that the end is never absolute, and that memory itself can be the truest form of illumination. Thus, the city's final light is not a lament but a testament. It reveals that even in decline, humanity leaves behind echoes of thought, traces of ritual, and patterns of life that defy annihilation. Civilization in its last glow whispers to us across centuries that existence, intention, and memory are never entirely extinguished, that life's imprint endures in subtle yet profound ways, and that even in ruin, there is beauty, meaning, and quiet, eternal illumination. Beneath layers of soil, beneath centuries of shadow and silence, the city endures. It is neither alive in the way we breathe, nor dead in the absolute sense. It exists in a liminal state, a threshold between absence and remembrance, between destruction and persistence. Every stone, every fragment, every subtle imprint of human presence speaks to a truth that is both simple and profound. Civilizations do not vanish entirely. They endure in memory, in trace, in the quiet resonance of lives once lived. This city, buried and forgotten by the casual observer, refuses to die because it has left its essence indelibly upon the world. Its streets, overgrown yet perceptible, carry the pulse of generations who once walked them. Footsteps pressed into clay, patterns of trade, traces of ceremony, all speak of a society that, despite conquest, decay, and abandonment, persisted in consciousness. The city's inhabitants, long vanished, left behind a language not only of stone and inscription but of intention and presence. In the alignment of streets, in the placement of public squares, in the meticulous construction of walls, they embedded their lives into the very fabric of space. And though time has weathered the surfaces, the narrative of their existence remains legible to those patient enough to see. A civilization's refusal to die is as much psychological as physical. The memory of community, of ritual, of law and commerce, was carefully cultivated and passed down through generations. Oral traditions, secret ceremonies, and the subtle preservation of sacred objects ensured that, even when the city's political and economic structures collapsed, the soul of the society persisted. These were not mere relics. They were acts of defiance, assertions that life, belief, and culture could transcend the impermanence of the material world. Memory became armor, practice became resistance, and the intangible became the most enduring artifact of all. Even the remnants of conflict speak to this persistence. Evidence of conquest, scorched rooftops, shattered statues, collapsed fortifications, does not signal annihilation but transformation. The city adapted, its culture morphing to survive, its identity shifting to endure. Where invaders sought to erase, citizens resisted through memory, through continuity of practice, through the preservation of knowledge. Every clay tablet preserved, every wall repaired, every ritual observed in secret was an act of assertion. We existed, we endure, and we matter. Civilization, in this sense, is less a matter of walls or armies than of consciousness, the ongoing thread of intention and meaning carried across time. Archaeology illuminates these truths in fragments. Pottery shards, inscriptions, remnants of infrastructure. All seem ordinary at first glance, yet together they form a tapestry of human resilience. They tell of daily lives, of social hierarchies, of sacred observances and festive gatherings. They reveal adaptation, ingenuity, and courage. In piecing together these remnants, scholars become witnesses to the city's enduring heartbeat, recognizing that even in ruin, civilization persists. Not in grandeur, but in continuity, subtle and quiet, yet no less powerful for its invisibility. This refusal to die is also a testament to the human spirit. Inhabitants lived knowing impermanence would touch them, yet they acted with intention, creativity, and devotion. They built temples to honor gods, marketplaces to sustain life, homes to shelter families, and records to preserve memory. Every act was an argument against oblivion, a conscious choice to assert existence despite the inevitability of decay. The city's essence, preserved in these traces, demonstrates that culture and memory are more resilient than stone, more enduring than conquest, and more persistent than time itself. As twilight descends over the ruins, the city seems to exhale its centuries of memory. The streets, though empty, vibrate faintly with echoes of labor and laughter. The river, though diverted and diminished, recalls the rhythm of commerce and ritual. Temples, though roofless, retain the aura of devotion. Even the dust and soil seem charged with the persistence of human presence, as if every particle conspires to whisper, "We were here and we remain, even when unseen." This is the true monument of the city, not the structures that crumble, but the living memory embedded in every trace, every pattern, every fragment of intention. To witness this city is to understand the nature of endurance. Civilization is not measured solely in walls or artifacts, but in the subtle persistence of identity, culture, and memory. The city refuses to die because it exists simultaneously in the past, present, and imagination of those who observe it. It teaches that even when empires collapse, even when fire and water erode the material world, the human impulse to be remembered, to assert meaning, and to preserve life endures. And so, the lost city speaks not with the thunder of conquest, nor with the permanence of monuments, but with a quiet, insistent voice. It reminds us that history is not only a record of triumphs and defeats, but a ledger of human persistence. The mundane acts, the deliberate choices, the rituals that carry life across generations. A civilization refused to die because it lives in memory, in trace, and in the enduring power of intention. In listening closely, we hear not ruins but resilience, not absence but presence, not an ending but continuity, a testament that even when buried, even when forgotten, humanity persists. In the end, the city is eternal not in stone, but in its defiance, in the whispers of its streets, the imprint of its people, and the memory it leaves upon the world. Time may settle dust over its walls, conquerors may claim its plazas, and centuries may obscure its streets, yet it survives, in imagination, in study, and in the subtle insistence that what once lived cannot vanish entirely. A civilization refused to die, and in this refusal, it achieves a form of immortality more profound than any empire, more enduring than any monument. The quiet persistence of memory, carrying forward across time the heartbeat of a people who once called this place home.